The withholding we currently have today was to have been a temporary measure. Funny how these temporary things get to sort of be permanent. It's amazing.
Do you think that keeps some people from realizing just what they're paying?
Of course. You ask the average taxpayer in this period, especially of the year, are you going to pay them any money this? Oh, no, I'm getting money back. Well, they neglect the fact that they've had 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000, depending on their income, or 5 or more, withheld over the period of the year. They've simply given the government an interest-free loan for the 12 months or so of the year.
We were talking too about the history and how these things start off small, they continue to grow and get bigger, but how hard is it to replace a system? Certainly you can't find anyone that goes, or I've been unable to find anyone that goes, oh, the current tax system's great, we love it, let's keep it. You're even hearing talk in Washington now about some alternatives to the tax system and possibly changing it, but you have several different alternatives, and you've mentioned it, once these things get in, they're hard to change. What are the odds that we could see something done or see reform?
I think they're quite good, and for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the areas you've already touched on, the fact that the current system is now viewed by even the average guy in the street as an onerous, incredibly Byzantine, burdensome system. But we have some strong allies on Capitol Hill, one of whom is chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Bill Archer. Mr. Archer has been stated or has been quoted in recent news periodicals as having said that after this last election, the '92 election, his goal before leaving Congress was to, quote, tear out the income tax and throw it on the side, tear it out by the roots and throw it on the side of the road, close quote. So we have a strong ally there. Newt Gingrich has been literally haunted by CATS members at the 10 town hall meetings he held in the Atlanta area. I've been at most of them, Neil's been at most of them, we've been at the mics asking the question, and after the question, which is basically, would you encourage or how would you tell us you'd go about, what is your position vis-a-vis replacing the current income tax in the IRS, Newt will take a poll asking how many people want to keep the current system or go to something else, and it's 70 or 80% overwhelmingly in favor of replacing this current system. And another component we haven't talked about, the IRS is a technological T-Rex. It's breaking down, it's imploding, it's incapable of keeping up with the load. The Congress is tinkering with the code. Since '86, the TEFRA Act, the last major tax reform, there have been 4,000 changes to the code. The IRS can't keep up with it. They're using 20-year-old computers which are incapable of being networked together. They can't even talk between regions. The system is falling apart. And even the IRS admits that. They've blown through $2 billion trying to upgrade the system with a $7 billion cap on their spending. They can't do it. They know they can't do it. We'd better have a system in the wings to replace the current system. And even the IRS admits that a sales tax or an indirect tax of the type we're encouraging is a far easier tax to collect than the current system.
Neil, any concerns that rather than replacing the income tax with the sales tax, that Congress may say, okay, well, we'll use the sales tax and implement it and keep the income tax in place at the same time?
Right, of course there's a concern, and that's why the grassroots operation is so important. If the public gets behind it and helps pull the oars in the boat, we can make this change for the benefit of the public. But you see, one of the reasons that the politician doesn't like it is that most of the lobbying effort in Washington, D.C. is somebody tinkering with the income tax in return for a small check. And that's why they fight us so hard. So we need people. We need people to get behind this thing and really write their congressmen, senators, and support CATS and make this effort.
There's a saying in Washington, or a saying that I've liked to use over the years, that when they feel the heat, they see the light.
Well, the sales tax isn't the only alternative plan out there. There are also plans for a flat tax in place. Dick Armey's plan's gotten a lot of discussion, and we'll talk about that as Close Up continues. Welcome back to Close Up. We're discussing alternatives to our current income tax system. Now, most of our discussion is centered around the national sales tax, which two of you are members of a group that is pushing heavily for the national sales tax, CATS, Citizens for an Alternative Tax System. There's also been discussion up in Washington, D.C. of a national flat tax. Percentages are pretty much in line with what you were pushing or proposing with your sales tax. It'd be around 15 to 17%, and what it would involve is just a flat percentage of your income, and you'd send them a check each month so you wouldn't have to do all the paperwork or work with deductions and all of that. It's supposed to be a very simplified system. Henry, any thoughts on that? How would that affect you as a business?
Oh, it's a giant step ahead of what we have now. Anything that would simplify it still leaves the culprit in charge, and that is, it still leaves the IRS in place. It's very difficult to see, if they don't could get the spending under control, that same revenue agency isn't going to just expand back and become what it was again. I'd certainly prefer it over what we have now. Anything that would simplify it greatly. I would really prefer to see a sales tax which would eliminate the need for the IRS completely and still provide the revenue there. But it would certainly simplify it. It also, by the way, it would leave a lot of unemployed professionals, particularly in accounting, a lot of tax lawyers, a lot of estate planners, which is a growing field out there. There would be a question how it would affect the sales of BMWs and some of these items that the high-income professionals in the tax field deal with. But I think overall, the effect that it would have on the business climate and the investments, if we can get that simplified under control, would be greatly. And the savings, by the way, would be much greater than just the reduction in taxes that you're paid. There's a large portion of that, Dick has said $600 billion, I believe, that we spend complying with the taxes that are out here. That's $600 billion that's left for us to invest in our business, pay employees, raise the income, or whatever. So, I mean, I think it's a giant step, but I think it still falls short.
There's a human cost, too, and it's 5.4 or so billion man-hours wasted, literally frittered away in this country. Time that you can't spend with your kids or growing a business or fishing or whatever it is you'd like to do rather than shuffle papers for the government. That's a human cost that really has to be thrown into this equation as well. It can't be overlooked.
I guess it's something that people that are working this time of year doing their own taxes, they're quite aware of the several hours that it takes.
Think about April 15th. Not having to be a time when you rummage through the closet and find shoeboxes full of receipts and sit down with a calculator and pots full of coffee and grouse at the wife and kids. And my disposition goes to pieces around January 1st because I know what I'm facing. Imagine April 15th as just another beautiful spring day.
What are your thoughts on the flat tax?
Well, the flat income tax, and there's a term that has to be inserted there because it is still an income tax. It is a tax on incomes, and it's still a direct tax on people. The founders never envisioned that we would tax people directly. Jefferson said that it is the pride of every American that no American mechanic, farmer, or tradesman ever sees a U.S. tax gatherer. People didn't have to interface with agencies like the Internal Revenue Service when we began this country. And for 125 years, there was no interface of that sort. Today, we have a whole different system where we're taxing people, we're not taxing things, and that's the difference between a direct and indirect tax. I dislike the Army tax for that reason, and not in addition to the ones that Henry's already indicated.
Now, you've mentioned both with the flat tax and with the sales tax, you are going to have people out of work. The IRS is a huge government agency. Dismantling it's going to put a lot of people out of work. You've got accounting firms, so I'm sure a lot of people that work with H&R Block or private accounting services. So what's going to happen to all these people?
Our studies indicate that many of the tax professionals, although they make a good living doing so, they resent the shuffling of paper for the federal government, essentially becoming clerks for the federal government. Steve Hayes, one of the founders of CATS, is a tax attorney and a CPA. He would much prefer to help his business clients become more competitive in our increasingly global world markets and find new ways of becoming efficient and more productive. He would just as soon walk away from that aspect of his business, and many of them who think about it would as well.
You still have to admit, for a lot of these accounting firms, though, this time of year is like Christmas is for retailers.
Sure, exactly. But again, there's that, I think, a deep resentment of their having to do this. They're essentially well-paid servants of the federal government, and that's not how the system was originally constructed. We need to turn this around.
We talked a little bit earlier about some of your lobbying efforts, what's going on. What are you doing right now? There's talk of people that want change up in Washington. What are you doing to try to see that change goes through?
Well, our next big effort is on the 13th of April when we'll be going to Washington from all over the country with people. From Georgia, we're taking around 20 to maybe 30 people. Anyone that wants to go can. And we'll actually be walking the halls of Congress handing out flyers and things like that. So we do that. We, of course, will be at the post offices on the 17th and handing out flyers to people who are interested, trying to educate the public. And anybody that would like to can call 1-800-767-7577 for information, and we'll be happy to send them anything on that.
This is something that people, they don't like it, but they don't think about it most of the year until March or April, and then the rest of the year they don't worry about it.
Well, I think it's hard to find, as you opened the show saying, that anybody that's against the idea of changing it because of the onerousness of the system. But our people are too apathetic, and it does come to the forefront more in this period of time.
You've also mentioned, in addition to changing the system, that you feel that there needs to be some changes in spending up in Congress and what have you. Some of those changes seem to be dragging along. Line item veto. You've got, of course, balanced budget amendments. What are your feelings there? I mean, every time you look at different devices that you're saying need to be put in place to lead the change, you're seeing them having trouble going through there.
Yeah, my take on what's happening, and I commend Gingrich for nationalizing the district elections for Congress with the contract. My question is, what happened to the original charter document of this country, the United States Constitution? It was Mr. Adams who warned us that a nation of well-informed men who've been taught to know and to prize the rights which God has given them cannot be enslaved. It is in the region of ignorance that tyranny begins. We've become ignorant of our heritage and our foundations as a country. When we get back to that, all the rest of these problems will fall into place and solve themselves.
All right, well, thank you all for joining us today on Close Up. Once again, we have Neil White with CATS, and also we have Dick Bockert, who is also with CATS. That stands for Citizens for an Alternative Tax System, and local businessman Henry Oliner, who is also involved in some tax reform groups. But thank you for joining us for Close Up, and we'll see you back here next week.